I want to start by talking about how I was wrong. I know. Have you ever heard that from a talk show host before? I was wrong. I was wrong when the city of Minneapolis decided to almost stop pulling people over for traffic violation. I was convinced by the data that I think is still very convincing that Minneapolis police officers were overwhelmingly being violent and aggressive when they pulled over black people. They were pulling over black people at a much higher rate than pulling over white people. And reformers were all saying, like, look, it's not worth it. And this is what I bought into. And now I'm telling you that my heart was in the right place, but I was wrong. 651-461-9226. It is time for city police, Minneapolis and St. Paul, to start pulling over people for traffic stuff, for speeding, for running red lights, for things that when you have a shortage of police officers and you have to choose what priorities to focus on, it makes sense that we said, well, we want the cops to worry about murders and shootings and sexual assaults and violent felonies. We can't have officers pulling people over just for running a red light, especially when we know the data indicates that they pull over more people of color than white people. The reduction in police stops for traffic, as reported today by Axios, is staggering. It's staggering. In 2018, Minneapolis police were pulling over something like 12,000 people for a moving violation. Last year, they pulled over 2,700. Now, what I'm not sure about is if we want officers pulling over people for equipment violations. You know, the burnt out taillight, the mirror with the kind of Christmas tree scent thing hanging from the rear view mirror. In 2018, police pulled over about, it looks like 6,500 in Minneapolis for those equipment violations. Last year, we pulled over 495. So we're talking about pulling over what? 18 to 20,000 people at a peak in 2018 for a moving violation and equipment violation. 20,000 people. Last year, it was about 3,100. That's it. And we know what has happened. People are driving reckless. There are more traffic crashes. There is an issue with fatalities. In the city of Minneapolis, they're saying high speeding is our biggest traffic safety challenge. I think a lot of us bought into this idea that, does all this enforcement actually do anything? Are the police just harassing people of color? And we know. Now we know. And that's why I can very easily say that I was wrong. Dramatic decreases in enforcement, says the University of Minnesota's Associate Professor Nicole Morris. Dramatic decreases in enforcement do make roads more dangerous. Now, if you cut down enforcement a little bit, you go from 18,000 people pulled over to 13 or 14 or 15. The researchers say that probably doesn't matter. But enforcement matters. Enforcement matters. And our city is less safe. I know people are very fixated on issues of violent crime, right? You're worried you're going to get carjacked or you're worried you're going to get. And the reality is a lot of those numbers have stabilized or gone down. Crashes, fatalities have gone up. And the city of Minneapolis is sort of obsessively engineering roads in a way to reduce speeds. We got more windy roads. We got parking taken away. There are more stop signs. And those engineering solutions do make a difference also, right? By slowing people down, that's going to make things safer. But that's a long-term approach. And I think the evidence is clear. We solved the wrong problem. The problem is that officers were disproportionately pulling over people of color. Now, texture already saying, is it possible? Is it possible that black people are breaking the law more than white people? Yeah, it is possible, right? I mean, sure, in the city of Minneapolis, it depends what issues you're talking about. When it comes to speeding, do I think that more black people, disproportionately, that more black people are speeding than white people? No. I think the data is clear. Like people can look for, they can look for whatever excuse they want. But I think we all know that not only were black people being pulled over at a disproportionate level, I think what was most alarming was this state investigation that Minnesota did, where they looked at Minneapolis and said, okay, not only are people being pulled over disproportionately, but it's an issue of violence. That's the problem. That when a person of color is being pulled over, they're more likely to end up, getting in a physical confrontation with the officer. And I guess here was my thinking. My thinking was for the gain we get in pulling over somebody for a busted out taillight or for speeding, the risk that something could go wrong, the risk that something could escalate, that somebody could get shot or worst case scenario killed, to me, it wasn't worth it. And I advocated for an end to pulling over people for those kind of minor offenses. Well, I was wrong. I was wrong. 651-461-9226 is our number. Jason, when you're wrong, you're supposed to double down, not admit you're wrong. Just ask any politician. Yeah, I guess I'm doing this wrong, Dan. This isn't quite how talk radio is supposed to work. I'm not supposed to admit it when I'm wrong. But sometimes we're wrong, right? And I do think that the thought process behind this was correct. But we tried it. To me, it didn't work. Didn't work. I will tell you, I am more afraid of someone running through a red light in the city of Minneapolis. I am more afraid of somebody driving 90 miles an hour on the interstate than I am of getting carjacked, of getting shot, of getting stabbed, of getting punched. The scariest part of my existence of being in the city every day is in the car. It just is. Texter saying all my statements are prefaced with, we all know, or I think. I don't know, and I don't think you are correct. All right, why don't you call in and tell me what you're talking about? That makes no sense. 651-461-9226. You don't think I'm correct that I was wrong? You think I was right? You think they shouldn't be doing traffic stops? The data that Axios posted, to me, is staggering. And it clearly sends the message that you're not going to get caught. And I do think fear of getting caught makes people drive safer. Fear of getting caught makes you stop at a stop sign and stop at a red light. And if you believe there is zero chance that you're going to get pulled over, you're going to drive like a jerkwad. And I think right now there is about zero chance that you're going to get pulled over. 2,700 people is all that was pulled over for a moving violation in the city of Minneapolis in a year. 2,769 divided by 365 days is just 7 people a day. 7 people a day in a city this big being pulled over. Dave is in Minneapolis. He's a retired police officer. Dave, thanks for calling in.
Hey, Jason. I've just got a few points here. Number one, it's gotten to the point where the respect for law enforcement is basically disappeared. So basically any traffic stop is going to turn into a confrontation. There is a no chase policy in Minneapolis right now. So when an officer sees a stolen car and pulls in behind them, unless the guys get out with their hands up, they take off at 100 miles an hour, and you can't chase them. So there's off they go, and where God forbid they hit somebody during that attempt to get away, but it just isn't worth it. I mean, if you go to work every day and you try to just do the best job you can, and you see somebody commit an infraction in front of you, forget it. Why this could turn into something really nasty. People are going to say, you got all these YouTube videos and say, well, why are you stopping me? I'm not rolling my window down, all that stuff. And it's
Right.
pandemic.
Right.
So there's your answer.
It is different. And
not that they don't want to do it.
No, I think it's policy. Isn't it policy against it right now? It's the city basically said, and the police department said, like, we're not pulling over people anymore for the kind of, right now, MPD officers are not allowed to pull people over for expired license plates, but the equipment stuff, right? But if you don't signal for a turn, you're not allowed to pull people over for it.
Yeah, and that's in it of itself. That was never done to begin with.
Well, it was. The data shows it was done. Looking at what it was done in 2018, there were more like 7,000 people that year pulled over for equipment violations. Those kind of minor things. So it was happening. 7,000.
Yeah. And granted, people are pulled over for no reason and for racial profiling. I'll be the first to admit that.
Yeah.
But also a traffic stop can lead to finding drugs or finding guns, and and then it's another tool you've taken away from the guys that are working on the street.
That's what I worry about, and that's exactly where I'm saying I was wrong, Dave. That I think. The data showed that the number of times you end up finding guns in those kind of traffic stops is pretty small. But I think the fact that we've sent the message to everybody that you can drive however you want, it is leading to crashes and deaths. And I think the cost of that is much greater than I would have anticipated. I think the results have been terrible.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thanks, Dave. Good luck is right. 651-461-9226. So some of you have been asking for the data. Federal investigators looked at the city of Minneapolis and found that Minneapolis Police Department conducts traffic and pedestrian stops against Black people 6.5 times more frequently than white people in the city, a rate only surpassed by enforcement activities against Native Americans, who are stopped at a rate of 7.9 times more than white people. Now, all of that has been adjusted for the share of the population. So that is striking. That is a striking data point to me. And it is why the city of Minneapolis scaled back sort of those pretextual traffic stops. So things that were sort of minor, at least perceived as minor stops. But you look now at the fact that the number of crashes, the number of fatalities is up. To me, I'm saying, despite my concern about racial profiling, which I think, to me, it's crystal clear, racial profiling. We heard a retired police officer just say that for sure, some of what happens out there is racial profiling. To me, the quickest way to solve that problem was to stop doing traffic stops. And while perhaps we did solve that problem, we have created another. And I do think today that other problem is major. Speed, traffic violations, and the sense of, I don't want to say anarchy that sounds sort of alarmist, and one of our texters said anarchy is what we end up with. But when you think there's no chance you're going to get busted, there is a large segment of the population that just breaks the law. And it's making all of us less safe. Now, the city of Minneapolis is taking part in a pilot program, traffic cameras. Minneapolis is going to get 5 of them. They could pop up in August. And about 80% of the traffic fatalities in Minneapolis happen because of high speed. I think we've all, if you've been in the city, you've felt it. And Dan, you drive down here all the time.
Yes.
You feel the fact that the red light feels optional right now. When I stop at a red light and when the light turns green, if I'm the first one to go through the green, I'm waiting. I'm looking, because so many people are just running right through it.
Giving it a beat and looking. Yeah. I mean, both vehicles and pedestrians, although obviously vehicles are the greater danger. But yeah, there's a lot of optionality going on in the city right now.
I just think it's time to get back to pulling over people. And I understand if police officers are concerned that something might escalate and that people might be jerks. And, you've got a YouTube video. I think part of this is a commitment to saying, like, look, if the police do this in a way that is not discriminatory, we'll have their back in those situations. That when the video comes out, we're going to wait before we freak out and say, well, there go the cops again. So I think that has to be part of this. But I do think it's time to get back to traffic enforcement.
It's not an all or nothing game is what you're basically saying. And I think you're right about that. It's not, well, we either have to just let cops do whatever they want, however they want to do it, or we can't do it at all. I don't buy into that binary.
Taxter says, I think if enforcement is going down, then the penalty needs to be higher. I just think the reality is do you think you're going to get pulled over for speeding within the city limit? State Patrol is still pulling over drunk drivers. DWI enforcement is at about the same level as it was pre-pandemic. So the State Patrol is still kind of doing its thing. But within the city, it's different. I don't know if a tougher penalty is enough. We got to do something about it, about the reckless driving. It feels unsafe. It is unsafe. It's not just it feels unsafe. It is unsafe.